Hey guys, it's Miss Jenkins. I am going to give you the lecture for Unit 14. We have 14 and 15 this week. I am going to do the best I can to get both up. We are almost to the end of the semester, guys, so just a little bit further and we'll be fine. Just let me know if you have any questions. So Unit 14, because it was only 2 parts this week, I combined it with 15 so you weren't overdone next week. Just make sure that you have both done. Remember, I removed the FRQ for this week, so that's one of the reasons I moved it. If you have questions, just let me know. So key terms, this covers all of the key terms and the key people. I did update both lists, so make sure that you're aware of those. So our unit is the troubled mind, and we are looking at psychological disorders. So this is a pretty dense chapter. It's not a happy-go-lucky, so just be aware it might trigger you if you are, have some of these issues in you. I'm not going to play this right now. I will play it during the class session, but it just shows an intro to some of the disorders. It will play if you watch it later, so just be aware. So what is abnormality? Behavior outside kind of the social norm. It's an inability to function, it's distress, it's prolonged suffering, kind of all those things in one. This is the continuum between normal and abnormal. You have deviance, you have maladaptive, and then you have you have deviance, you have personal distress, and then you have maladaptive behavior. So, sorry about that. It's a little hard to read on that. It's a little dark. All right, so how do we diagnose and how do we look at these mental disorders? Basically, we use this book called the DSM-4, and it is the book that holds all of the disorders in them. And these are all of the disorders that have been recognized by the American Psychiatric Association. So make sure that you're aware of that. There are 5 different editions. The first came out in 1952. Then the next one did not come out till 94. The most recent revision was done in 2013. And sometimes they add to this, sometimes they remove, depending on what society is like and what things are recognized as diseases and not diseases. You might be surprised that some of the things in the 1952 book were not actually psychiatric diseases or disorders as we see them now. Just be aware, that there are changes from various years. So we're going to start out with personality disorders. I'm going to name the disorders and then we'll talk about those disorders in specific areas, and we'll talk about how they're how they manifest. So the first is antisocial personality disorder. Generally, this is called a sociopath. It's marked by impulsive, callous, manipulative, aggressive, kind of a lack of conscience. Often these people are incredibly charming. They don't look like they're crazy. They don't act like they're crazy. The one thing that sets them apart is that they have no empathy. So take, for instance, you witness a cat being run over in the street. That's going to make you incredibly upset. You're going to cry. You're going to be horrified. You're going to want to save the cat. Somebody with antisocial personality disorder is going to look at the cat and go, wonder if it would have died if it had only been driving 15 miles an hour instead of 30. I mean, they would have no empathy for the animal that had died or had been hurt. They would just continue to go on. One of the hallmarks of this disorder, generally they test this by yawning in the person's presence, because people with empathy tend to reciprocate that and they'll yawn back. So that tends to be one of the hallmarks. We also have narcissistic behavior, which is feeling of self-worth and constant need for affirmation. So histrionics is kind of an overly emotional person, somebody that just, gets excited very easily. That's usually kind of an old term. Most people don't talk about that, call it that anymore. We have borderline personality disorders, which are kind of irrational fears of abandonment or self-injury. Then we have the schizotypical and schizoaffective types. Again, we're going to go into some of these more deeply and look at the specifics for them. Dissociative disorders. Oh, I thought I had changed that picture. My goodness, that is kind of disturbing. Dissociative disorders are, you have dissociative amnesia, which is kind of sudden memory loss that's not classified as normal forgetfulness. It's usually also, it can have a fugue state, which is forming basically a whole new identity. You literally dissociate from who you are. There's also dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities, DID. That's coexistence of more than one personality in an individual. Generally, the multiple personalities are not aware of each other except for the main personality that controls all of the rest. So you would, generally this happens from severe trauma, like child abuse, maybe witnessing a murder when you're very young. Your brain would literally separate and there would be somebody to help deal with the abuse, and then there would be the other personality that's not aware that that's happening. So this can be something that's faked, like people fake this to try to get out of things. It's heavily publicized on television. They love writing things about this disorder, but there are real instances where this has happened, and it's generally, again, because of severe trauma. We also have depersonalization or derealization. That's kind of the feelings that unreality concerning the self and environment. So you're basically disassociated from reality itself. So that's a little bit different. We had schizophrenia spectrum. It's kind of a group of disorders that are marked by disturbances through patterns. So we have catatonia, which is a motor disturbance that's ranging from immobility to excessive or purposeless activity. Catatonia is literally kind of being there but not being aware of anything, kind of like the lights are on but nobody's home. Schizophrenia in and around itself has to have at least one of the below. It has to have at least one, either delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized speech. Schizophrenia is about 1% of the population in every culture. 30% of schizophrenics are resistant to drugs, and there can be a gradual onset of this, or it can be a sudden onset. It can happen both ways. It just depends. Potential causes for schizophrenia, there can be a psychological cause, like a neurochemical, like excessive dopamine. It could be enlargement of the ventricles of the brain. Genetics, there's 46% concordance rate for identical twins with one suffering from schizophrenia. Or it could be like an environmental issue. Stress can precede the onset of it. Unhealthy family dynamics, high expression of emotions, and communication difficulties. Or it could have something to do with your birth, maybe flu season while you were, in gestation. Maybe getting the flu vaccine had some impact on fetal development. There is a book that came out recently within the last 5 years called Hidden Valley Road. It is looking at one family in the 1970s where 6 out of the 10 boys in the family, there were actually 11 children, there was one girl, 6 out of the 10 boys in one single family all had schizophrenia. So this is a very interesting book to read. I've gone through some of it, but basically the daughter ends up as kind of the control person in the family because in this family it runs in the male line versus the female line. So that's kind of interesting. It's on audiobook. If you're interested in reading it, it is a very interesting read. I actually have the book, and it's pretty interesting. So relative risk of schizophrenia, again, this deals with the birth month based on, I was born in September, so that's kind of one of the low months. They say higher months, February, March, have more to do with that. Interestingly enough, my mother was born in March, and she is bipolar. So maybe that does have something to say with, vaccines. You never know. So relatives of schizophrenia, the general population, it's about 1%. Sorry about that. It kind of goes up as, society goes down. Half siblings, about 6%. Then you have children with schizophrenic mothers. Again, it increases as you have more family members that have it. Fraternal twins, about 17%. Children with schizophrenic parents, again, it does run in genetic pools. So a child with a schizophrenic parent can have a higher risk of schizophrenia. And identical twins have the highest rate next to a child of two parents that have schizophrenia. That's extremely unusual for two parents to have it. That would almost double the rate of a child having it. So that's pretty high. We also want to talk about anxiety disorders. So we have panic attacks. That's a recurring attack of anxiety, not really due to a specific reason. You have phobias, which is a chronic irrational fear of, specific things like arachnophobia, so being scared of spiders, or agoraphobia, being scared of open spaces. General anxiety disorder, that's going to be a chronic anxiety disorder that's not really caused by specific things. And then we have selective mutism. That's where a child can't speak or communicate in specific social settings. So it's a little bit different. We have kind of a variety of disorders there. Common phobias, I am of the bug and mice and snake phobia, not my favorite things in the whole world. I'm not really afraid of heights. Of course, that doesn't mean I'm going to scale the side of a 100-story building. Water, public transportation, storms, closed places. Claustrophobia is one of the biggest ones that people have, where they're scared of small spaces. And of course, it varies by the population. So that's just a cool little phobia thing. Causes of anxiety disorders, we have behavioral, kind of classical conditioning to phobic responses. So you see it all the time, therefore you are afraid. If you see on TV all the time that people should be afraid of spiders, it kind of gets in your head and all of a sudden you're afraid. Neurochemical, decrease in GABA activity. Serotonin activity is also associated with anxiety disorders. Or it could be cognitive. People who suffer from these disorders may have chronically overestimate the severity of their threat. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about people that are, shut-ins, that are scared to go outside, that kind of thing. We also have somatoform disorders. I had to look this one up. I had never heard of this before. Basically, it is kind of a general loss of function of like one of your organ systems without really having a physiological cause. Conversion disorder is one of these. Causes of it could be personality. People with histrionics or neurotic personality traits are susceptible to this. Behavioral factors are people who have previously received a lot of attention because of the illness, but maybe now they're not, getting that reward. Something like that might be the case. Obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, that's the repetitive compulsive things like making sure your hands are cleaned 100 times a day because you're a germaphobe, or making sure before you leave a room that you turn the light switch on 6 times every time you leave the room, on and off 6 times, or making sure that, before you eat your dinner, that everything is organized in a clock formation. There's hundreds and hundreds of these. I mean, it just kind of depends. Compulsions is the need to do unnecessary rituals, again, like turning the light on and off so many times. There could also be body dysmorphic disorders, hoarding, trichotillomania. Might have said that wrong. That's where you compulsively pull out your hair, or excoriation, skin picking. So there's a lot of these that you can have. All right, so some trauma and stress-related disorders. You have acute stress disorder, immediate reaction to trauma. You have adjustment disorder, again, adjusting after trauma. You have post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. After a traumatic event, you have anxiety, helplessness, fear, flashbacks, all of those. Reactive attachment disorder. This is generally in younger people, like children. It results from social neglect and other situations that limit a child's opportunity to form attachments. This is something that people that are going to adopt children have to learn about, because it's something that happens to children in foster care, where they just eventually learn to not have attachments to people because things change so frequently. Okay. Then we have depressive disorders. So we have major depressive disorders, persistent feelings of sadness, loss of interest, no pleasure in things for more than 2 weeks. Persistent depressive disorder, so lasting for more than 2 years. We have postpartum depression, which is generally after you give birth. Premenstruational dysphoric disorder. I have never heard of that one before, but based on what it is, I mean, we can kind of figure it out. Seasonal affective disorder. This is seasonal, meaning, when it's cloudy outside and gloomy, maybe during specific times of the year, Christmas and holidays, people tend to get depressed during that time of the year. And then we have disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. That's kids who exhibit persistent irritability and frequent episodes of extreme behavioral discontrol. That's something that they have to deal with. Then we have bipolar disorder. This is pretty new. This is something that's really got a lot of notice in the last few years. It's marked by chronic experience of manic and depressive episodes. So basically, your brain doesn't know how to regulate the chemicals in it. So you'll get episodes of extreme activity, and then you'll have episodes of extreme depression. So when we're talking about the manic episodes or the increased activity, you're talking about increased productivity without necessarily finishing something. So maybe the person will all of a sudden start all of these little projects all at one time, working 24 hours a day on them. And then all of a sudden they'll stop. They won't finish any of them. And then they'll have severe depression and they won't be able to get out of bed. So these are those highs and lows, and they can be cyclical. Depending on the type of bipolar that they can have rapid ups and downs, or they can have more kind of rolling hills where it's just a mild up and down. The ones that are the severe quick cycles, those are the ones that are the most dangerous because those can change so quickly. I actually read a series of books, and having somebody that I know that's bipolar, it's very interesting to read this because it's like taking a look into your own life. But I had an author that I used to read that wrote a series of books. She used to be a therapist at a teen facility where teenagers would go that had psychiatric issues. And she wrote this series of book based off of, placed where it's a teenager that has bipolar disorder and how, his life progresses and he's diagnosed and, how he goes off of his meds and then back on and just how that progresses. And I think that's very interesting. If you're interested in that, I could definitely try to find you that author in that series because it's a really great, series of books. All right, so some causes of depression. You can have cognitive and behavioral mechanisms. Behavioral being learned helplessness, believing the outcome of their lives are controlled, so an excessive loss of control. You can have cognitive negative self-talk is associated with depressive episodes. Psychological, so neurotransmitters, decreased norepinephrine and serotonin are associated with that. Genetic 65% concordance rate, again, between identical twins. Generally, they will give medication to treat the highs and lows to keep somebody more evenly, where they're not having those manic and depressive episodes. It's just to kind of keep them more stable. So when you're talking about depression, you're talking about possible suicidal ideation. So some warning signs of suicidal behavior, you're looking for changes in interest or mood, including extreme happiness or peacefulness. If that's abnormal, that's something to kind of be a red mark in your brain. Change in lifestyle, eating or sleeping, whether that's more or less. That would be a big change. Change in perception of the world. If all of a sudden they've had a pretty good outlook of the world and all of a sudden, it's all gloom and doom, that's another huge warning sign. Changes in attitude about personal property. So if all of a sudden they're giving away all of their possessions, that's a huge sign. I mean, if they're downsizing, that's one thing. But if they're just randomly giving away all their stuff just because, that's something that you need to be concerned about. So just a little warning signs there since we're talking about disorders. So there are some problems with the DSM-4. It's been a book that's been around for a long time. So Thomas Zaz actually said there was no such thing as mental illness. Rosahan said empty, hollow thud for 19 days. That kind of classifies it. Labeling theory. So that's a huge problem, is labeling. Not easy to classify certain things because they cross over into multiple areas. You can have a major depressive and a bipolar. So that would be a hard classification to have because it's in both areas. It infers more understanding than we actually have. And some of this can be everyday problems, that people just have to deal with, and there's no way to really classify that. And insurance is a huge problem for mental health. They have tried in the last few years to get insurance to approve a lot more of this mental health awareness, trying to get people, especially with COVID-19, the recurrence of mental illness has gone through the roof. People being isolated, not being able to be around other people, seeing the outside world, everything kind of shut down. That really kind of brings on a lot of depression in people. So we've seen a lot of that really starting to come into the public more since we've had the COVID-19. Insurance companies a lot of times don't want to cover certain things. So once a person is classified as a certain thing, that's considered a pre-existing condition because now they have been diagnosed with it. So if they were to go to another doctor, it would still be on there. So fighting with insurance companies is the bane of psychiatric disorders. So just be aware if you have family members that are like that, that is an issue. Lastly, I will again try to get the Unit 15 one done here pretty quickly. Here's my email and phone. I will not have office hours this week because I'm taking the day off. So if you need me, contact me a different way. I'm here to help you guys. Please, please, please make sure you're completing all of your assignments. You do still have another week left. There is no final in this course, but you are responsible for all of the coursework. It has to be turned in by the 25th in order to get exemption for other classes. Since there's no final here, that's not really an issue, but you have to have everything done by May 2nd. All right, guys, if y'all have any questions, let me know. I'm here to help. Bye.